Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to the 27th of February 2100. I'm amazed that you could all fit into that TARDIS. I guess it must be a bit bigger on the inside. And it's a great shame you're only stopping for 15 minutes, but in those 15 minutes, I want to show you some of what your future holds. You might be interested to know that 2015 historically went down as a really important year in the progress to where we are today in 2100. And it was for 5 specific reasons. The first was that the Paris Climate Conference in the end of 2015 killed politics. Why? The popular press said it was a disaster, terrible. The people who were involved knew it was an incredibly important step forward. Those involved, the big countries all agreed on a way forward, and us little minnows, the Australians, followed a suit. So it made the way forward through the century incredibly important. More importantly, however, it changed the way politics was viewed. So this strange thing that's happening where apparently action on climate change is a left-wing conspiracy, and if you have a right-wing right-wing view of life, then you deny the science. And that all just started disappearing. The Green Tea Party in the US combined with the Greens of Sweden. So it changed a lot. The second thing that changed in 2015 was the way environmental communications happened. Historically, before that time, the environment movement their communications was almost entirely futile. It missed on all the key points. It lacked any consideration of behavioral psychology. It lacked positive images. It lacked the power of attraction. And that year, it clicked, and the environmental communications changed. Instead of threatening people with bad things, it told them about a beautiful future. And that changed the way the community viewed this. The third thing, there's the communications. The third thing that happened in 2015 was the UN Sustainable Development Goals were issued. Now, this didn't get much coverage at the time, but it actually mainstreamed sustainability across all areas of the UN, and then in time across all areas of all governments. Again, looking back from 2100, this was an incredibly important change to the way the world viewed how they were going to go forward. But it didn't get much coverage in your year. Number 4, big finance started backing action. This happened in 2 ways. Firstly, the divestment movement, which had been going for a couple of years. It's kind of seen as this slightly radical out there idea that we start taking money out of fossil fuels, really took hold in 2015. The companies were very surprised. They complained it wasn't fair, it wasn't right. And we'll come back to that a little bit later, but it had a huge impact on the way things started moving. More importantly, in my mind, though, on big finance, was that people started making big money out of the transition to a low-carbon economy. This guy is a guy called Jack Ma. He founded Alibaba. In 2014, he was China's richest man. At the beginning of 2015, he was overtaken by this guy, Li Hejun. He was the founder of a Beijing solar company called Hanergy. Since that day, in 2015, every richest person in China, and shortly after that, every richest person in the world, came from the transition to a low-carbon economy. No more Googles, Microsofts, whatever you had back then, Facebook, whatever that was. They're long gone. It's the people who are leading the transition that actually made all the money. And lastly, there were some amazing future technologies launched in 2015. They changed the world. They were dominant companies for 50 years, and some of them were Aussies. I'll show you a handful. Raygen Resources started in Melbourne, concentrating solar photovoltaics. It did it in a way that was low cost, transportable, relocatable, and had inbuilt storage. It managed to produce energy cheaper than coal. It started in Melbourne, went to China, and then built thousands of plants all over the world. And one of the really interesting things about this, looking back historically, they've signed their first deal actually in 2014 in China. And the Prime Minister of the day, and now my history isn't quite right, but I know that this guy was rolled in 2015, but I'm not sure in which month, so he may still be your Prime Minister. But he was at the launch of this signing in Shanghai, and apparently he wasn't a great fan of the sector, so everyone was very surprised. Another technology out of Brisbane called Nano Nouvelle. a way of storing more energy in batteries, increased the energy density by 50% of lithium batteries. They proved their technology in 2015, became a huge global company, changed the way the world energy markets worked. Incredibly important company, and became very successful along with their investors. A Sydney company called Blue Glass in 2015 proved their solar technology. They'd already proven their LED technology. This had an efficiency of 65%, conversion efficiency, about 3 times what you have back in your day. And this is the reason we now have solar on every window, on every roof, on every car, on everything. This technology became huge. This company made a lot of money and was very successful. A Brisbane company called CleanTech, recycling shower, saves 70% of water and energy. Launched in the UK, their first products in 2015. They had a very nice niche market, very successful company for 30 or 40 years, but more importantly, it changed the way the world saw water, how it used it and reused it in the home and in industry. And their impact was seen historically as really, really important on how we changed our waterways. And finally, Carnegie Wave Energy, Perth-based company, who connected their first grid-connected wave energy plant in 2015, went on to build, I think the latest count was about 16,000 plants around in coastal cities around the world, and became, again, an incredibly successful company. So these companies led the way, the Australian companies led the way. Now, something else happened in 2015, which is slightly different. My great-grandfather, also called John O'Brien, by coincidence, was lucky enough to play a small part in this story. In 2015, old John got 75 of the world's leading thinkers and influencers to write down their vision for today, for 2100. By getting it written down, it helped focus on what behaviour was needed today to get to that future. It started a wider discussion about longer-term benefits, rather than the immediate challenges of elections, deficits, power bills, and again, someone told me this was right, but something called I'm a Celebrity, which sounds very odd. These visions were published as a book called Stories from Our Future. This was part of the change in communications. This change in communication I'd see a little bit, looking back, like the Beijing skyline. So in 2014, it was pretty bad, and all the talk was about how much worse it was going to get. How do we avoid it getting worse and worse? What are the bad things we're going to not do? But the conversation is never about what we really want. It's never an easy conversation. In the civilization back in your day, it was something that was almost taboo, very strangely. Historically, we now see that slightly similar to Victorian England and the taboo of talking about sex or women having the vote. You know, almost understandable in the cultural context of the time, but in hindsight, just really bizarre. So now in 2100, we talk a lot about what we really want. Our leaders get elected on competing visions for the future. Our community in general is comfortable to explore what makes it good to be human. But back to the book in 2015. Old John put it together, and they had many different thoughts. Some were very hopeful, some were very, very dark. Looking back at this book, it's amazing how many of them became true. Sadly, the good and the bad. And today I want to talk to you about just a few of those that came true, both the tall and the small. Christina Figueres, who led your climate change negotiations, was hopeful and optimistic, thankfully, and saw the world with unimaginable opportunities in 2100. Other people looked out the window of 2100 and guessed what they might see. Jonathan Wartzel from McKinsey in Shanghai saw the new race of Homo urbanus, living in cities that are shining archipelagi. Peter Newman from Perth saw the different ways that cities were built, get rid of the cars, do things more practically. Will Grant from Canberra told us about robo-gardeners, new meat, laser bubbles, parcel drones. All of those came true to some extent. Other people talked about the journey. John Renish from San Francisco told us how close we got to disaster, but that we ended up building a wonderful world. Jules Kortenhorst from the Rocky Mountain Institute told us how we now look back at just sort of shaking our head at some of the stuff we used to do. And others still talked about their hopes and their fears, how the human race evolved. Tessa Tennant from the UK Green Bank told us that she hoped for peace and plenty, a world of peace and plenty, but that she feared that we would not move fast enough. And that was right, we didn't move fast enough. And many, many people suffered because of that. Charles Landry, also from the UK, saw that we'd build civic urbanity led by a creative bureaucracy. Now imagine that. And some were very pessimistic. And when you go home today, these outcomes, these worst outcomes, are still possible. It depends on the decisions that you make in the next few years. Maybe your future will end up different to mine. Bill McKibben told us we blew it. Paul Dickinson, told us from the Carbon Disclosure Project, first coined the phrase the time thieves for the generation that didn't do enough. He told us how the great climate crisis was to unfold. Campbell Gemmell used to be in Adelaide, ex-CEO of the SA EPA, told us that 6 weeks of 50 degrees C in Adelaide was going to be normal. And Peter Doherty, a Nobel laureate from Melbourne, talked very accurately about how the climate crimes against humanity statutes were put in 2045 and the chaos that came out of that. So there are many different views, and all of these turned out to be at least partially right. Now, I want to give you some advice from the future to help you create the future that you want. Talk about what the world is that you want. It makes others brave enough to join the conversation. Sure, you'll get a few strange looks, but you'll actually get few people who'll disagree with you. Also accept that we have to start the journey from here. It's not perfect, but we're going to start from here. And as an aside, another phrase came in to the lexicon in 2015, slightly strangely. The village of Letterfrack in County Galway in Western Ireland became a symbol of the journey that we were going to go on, the symbol of the change that was needed. You've probably all heard the old Irish joke of a traveller going through the Irish countryside and asking for directions. And the answer he gets is, well, if I were you, I wouldn't be starting from here. Well, we have to start from here. We have no choice. And when we start from here, there are winners and losers. Companies lose, and companies win. People win. Lose, people win. But if you think of phones, fax machines, videos, steam trains, farmers, antiquated energy technologies, then they're all gone. Think of the big companies that have gone bust in the past. The yak cheese makers in Nepal, for instance. It's just economic evolution, and that happens all the time. If you prop up older industries, it doesn't stop progress, it just makes the harder fall. It makes the fall harder when it happens. I'll say that again. If you prop up old industries, it doesn't stop progress, it just makes the fall harder when it happens. Think of how Adelaide might have evolved if it had led the car industry into electric vehicles, rather than clinging on to making big fat cars that nobody wanted. The key to this evolution is to make sure that employees are taken care of. Shareholders take their risks. Smart shareholders get into new companies. And companies will complain. They'll always complain when there's change. Remember the divestment discussion at the beginning. If the companies are complaining, it just means they're not adapting quick enough to the change that's already happening. Those that adapt just stay quiet and make money. So your time here is nearly up. I wish you well. I hope you manage to make the right decisions, or at least those decisions with the least bad outcomes. Your future is not necessarily this one. If you take a different path, it might be better, or it might be worse. My future is beautiful. It's worth the effort in getting there. Don't get distracted, don't get disheartened. Spread the word that it's worth getting to that future. Good luck. I look forward to sharing a healthy, carbon-free beer with your grandchildren. And finally, just wanted to talk a little bit about my grandfather, Jack. Jack will be celebrating his 102nd birthday this year. He's very healthy, and he's still lecturing law in Beijing. This was him at the age of 16 in 2014. He chose a really interesting path in life. It's up to each of you to decide what world you want and what path you're going to choose to deliver it. Safe travels, goodbye, your TARDIS awaits.